when we started PayDirt, we didn't really know exactly what we wanted to do. And the last 3 years have been like a test in trying to meet new people. We, as a company, we had great relationships with certain trail organizations or certain advocates or certain people who were moving forward their communities, and we wanted to expand that. We didn't know how to reach out, so we put up the bat signal, which was the $1 million PayDirt. And it seemed to be a really good way of like, we wanted to stretch and meet more people. That was a really good way because we could sort of have like a lot of people come to us. And over the last 3 years, like getting to know a lot of communities, association, individuals who are all doing, as I said the other night, like the quiet work, the stuff behind the scenes, has been really special for it. And this particular gathering, originally we didn't really want to do this kind of thing. We felt like there was enough symposiums and a lot of people talking and waffling and not really getting action. But the last year or so, we were chatting and we just felt it was really important. We have an opportunity to redistribute some of our resources as a company, to also bring people together to create connections. The way we kind of see this is like, and I think we've seen it in the last hour or two with some of these discussions, there's people asking like, how do I reach out to people and learn more? And I think we've started to create a bit of a network here. So I think there's going to be some resources now, like Greg is a great resource for certain things, and you're probably going to get his contact and speak to him and vice versa, all these things. And that brings on to Chris. I've been listening to, Chris has an amazing podcast, Downtime podcast, which you might know, and I've been listening to it for a while, but in 2020, he put out a podcast with Phil Young and Elliot, actually. And it was around a really challenging subject, but I really appreciate how Chris approached it. He came in just saying, just like, I'm gonna make mistakes. I don't really know about all these things, but please, like, can we have a conversation, because I wanna learn more. And Chris was using his platform to basically, like, I was listening to it going, I'm Chris, I wanna know more, and it was fantastic for me. And this week, like, Chris for the last few months reached out and he said, like, I want to tackle subjects which are challenging and hard, which other particularly mountain bike media outlets are not approaching. He's got some great ideas on how to do that. And I just said to him, like, come out here to this. You're going to meet some people and you're probably going to get stimulated on ideas. You're probably going to find like great guests. You're probably going to be able to have some questions answered. But can you come here and just start from there? And so Chris now, I think, is going to basically just kind of summarize some of the stuff, but ask one of the most important questions. We're not just here to talk, but like, what comes next and what's the action from this? So.
Sweet. Cheers, Seb. First up, thank you. It's been humbling and inspiring to spend a few days with all of you, because the work you're doing is incredible. And yeah, super impressive. It's really cool to see Santa Cruz supporting that. And I think that's reflected by the amount of hours and the amount of staff from Santa Cruz that are here supporting this. So good work, love it. Yeah, why am I here, I guess? So I've built over 6.5 years a fairly sizable, for the podcast world, audience of passionate mountain bikers that I think represent, to some extent, the core of the sport as it is now. And I feel a personal responsibility and a drive to use that platform not just to entertain and provide information, but to help the sport move in a good direction. I feel like there's lots of great work going on, and that's clear being here, but a lot of it is sort of, like, to use a phrase, behind closed doors. Not many people get a window into that and hear all of these stories, and it's really, like, it's inspired me this week, and I'd like more people to hear some of this work that's going on. And there's loads more of it around the world, I'm sure, that I don't know about. So there was a trigger, I guess, to me around Black Lives Matters as well, which was kind of where I saw Elliot's piece that he put out, and I saw what Phil was doing and writing, and pulled that episode together, which was really challenging, a really interesting experience. It received a lot of hatred online, but also a huge amount of positive response. And I think it did move some people. I've had a lot of people get in contact saying how it's changed the way they look at things, and they understand that topic much better and they look at it differently. And there's multiple brands that I'm aware of large scale that are using that internally as a training tool or an education piece for their staff, which is really cool. We've done some stuff around gender diversity a while ago. We did an episode this year on sustainability with a consultant called Mike Bascom, and I know of at least two reasonably sized bike brands that are now working with Mike off the back of that, building sustainability plans and working on the organisation. So someone mentioned last night, are we preaching to the choir by talking to my audience about some of this stuff? And I think to some extent that's probably true. They are probably at the more thoughtful end of the spectrum of mountain bikers, but there is evidence that it can create some movement and some change. So I want to do more of that, but it's quite hard to do. It's not necessarily the most popular. It's not a growth opportunity for me as a business, but I feel like it's important, and I wanted to get some support on that. And so I reached out to Seb at Santa Cruz, and we sat down in Leger and had a nice espresso and some crepes and talked about it. And Seb seemed keen to kind of talk more. And then we spoke with Katie last week, and then now I'm here. So I want to do somewhere in the region of maybe 6 episodes next year, throughout the year, as like a mini series within the show around the challenges for the sport over the next 5 to 10 years, to try and get some conversations going, to get people thinking differently, maybe to give some exposure to some of the great work that's being done. So maybe like an organization that someone didn't know existed have already solved a problem that someone else is trying to solve on the other side of the planet, and they might reach out and get in touch. So I guess really I want to open it up to all of you people that have a history of identifying problems and putting action into place to solve it or to move the needle, to hear your thoughts on, well, what are our big challenges within mountain biking over the next 5 to 10 years? And it's not just limited to inclusivity, diversity, trail advocacy and the stuff we've discussed here. There's sustainability, the rise of e-bikes, issues with concussion. Like, I'm keen to hear your thoughts. Where are the challenges? Where do you see or what activity needs to be done to kind of close some of the gaps on that? And where would that resource potentially come from? Do we need help from your general mountain biker at the trail? Do we need help from brands? Do we need help from our athletes to be advocates for certain things? So I guess really an open floor for the next 30 minutes or so before we have lunch. Whenever Katie says we've got 2 minutes, we've got another 6 or 7. I'm going to get rid of this, and I'm going to take some notes, because hopefully we're going to, at some point, a few of us sit together and wrap up what we've heard in a podcast format, just to kick off next year's work, really. So you have the opportunity to influence what I talk about and what we put out there over the next 12 months.
Great. This almost feels like I'm calling you out, but like,
go for
so
it.
with trail associations and things like that, I think we're seen as being important. And you said these are the less entertaining things, or you won't get as many people listening.
Oh, hell yeah.
So that kind of thing is just like, I feel that's almost our biggest challenge often in terms of even like raising money. And it just made me think, we're all actually entertainers. Like, we build the trails. That is the entertainment, that's the engagement. You know, we're half of the sport. You know, bike one half, trails the other half. In the UK, that half is volunteer driven. So nearly all the trails and places where people ride are built by volunteers. And it just doesn't feel sustainable. And I know obviously you guys are really different and you're all well funded, but you know, we are running on volunteers to make mountain biking happen. But also we're seen as the boring bit. And it just feels like that's sort of getting over that. Whereas actually, you know, we're building trails, we're building, you know, each of those trails has a story from, you know, from the people that built it to the sort of the heritage of the area and things like that. There's so much interest and engagement in there, but that almost we are the backstory most of the time.
So what would you want done?
In terms of what I think it's how we are discussed. So, you know, recently we had something in a magazine, top 25 downhill trails in the UK, Still City on there. Brilliant, all these mentions of like, this is an amazing trail, these guys built it, we funded it. There was no mention of Roger in there. So actually, you know, you're always that kind of bit that's kind of sort of brushed out of it. So in terms of how they're represented, actually this is, you know, go and get involved with your local training associations, actually, you know, engage with them, be proud of them, be, you know, really care about them as much as all these other aspects of the sport, because without them, you don't have trails and many trails. So, just being more visible, and I don't know how you make us draw that.
You want trail associations to be sexy.
Yeah, basically, I just haven't got I just wear Lycra all the time, but that doesn't need to work. But yeah, I just think it's almost like our image is out of step with the rest of the sport, and we need to be, seen as exciting, as dynamic as the rest of the sport. And I like for what we're planning next week, that's kind of stuff we'll talk about. But yeah, how do we do that?
We, I'll just say from an industry perspective, like we grapple with a similar thing. Some of our PayDirt stories, we didn't want to appear performative when we were talking about the good work that you guys are doing. And there was also internally we were like, we're spending a lot of money to do photo shoots and write blogs and put social media posts up, just sell bikes. But there's enough of us in the company that push back and say, we need to do this. If there's 50 people that are inspired by that thing, it's going to make a change further down the line. It's kind of what we talked about earlier. The last subject is opening up a view of what mountain biking is. Like, it's been for the last 10, 15 years, it's just been people hucking off cliffs and people winning gold medals. And that's important to inspire and aspire. But I actually think there's a whole different type of cycling which can be inspirational and aspirational, which isn't about performance on the bicycle in any way at all. So
I'll give you a good example. The story with Elliot and his mom. There was talk about first, like, let's get Greg Menard with Elliot to talk about Growth Cycling Foundation. That's sexy part of it, right? Like Greg Menard. And thought about it, talked about it. And the story is Elliot and his mom. And how often do you hear about a mom in the cycling industry working with her son and who took him to all these bike races? And so we featured that, did a whole thing, a story, a photo shoot, all that stuff. It didn't get even close to the amount of likes or views that a hero bike shop would get. But it is one of the most I'm the most proud of it for all the stuff that we've done in the last couple of years. Really cool. So you keep doing it, right? But how do you get people more engaged? How do you do that?
It's a great question. I think you just have to keep doing it. I think that's the thing, you have to not be put off by it not. If you look at performance based on clicks and numbers, right, you're looking at the wrong metric.
Right.
That's not what you're trying to do with that piece, right? You're trying to tell a story that's important and get to some people. And the more often you do that and you keep coming back, I think the more people will get on board with it and kind of come on that journey. And it's going to take a while before it's as popular. For me, I can put out an episode with a female world champion and I can guarantee it will do 25 to 30% less downloads than an average male rider, which is an absolute disgrace. But it's changing. It is changing. That gap is closing. So I think you just got to be consistent and keep doing it.
It's about the aggregate of the work, right? Not the silver medal. Even with our chapters, we're always having the conversation. How can we add value? We're chasing this $39 membership from these folks every year so we can beef up our numbers. Yes, we get a cut of that, but what do they get? So it's not just trying to solve that in a one event like Big Bang. You're a member because of this. It's all of these little things, and like you're talking about, it's that variety of content and that humanizing of the content. When you build up that portfolio of all of that as an aggregate, it's probably going to be more valuable to you guys as a brand than Greg Menard, Lower Green.
He is pretty hot. What if we change tack and I say the word sustainability? What are your current positions and thoughts on that within the mountain bike world?
I'd say that, that's what Henry was saying. A lot of people don't realise how much volunteer work has gone into trail, so especially people getting into the sport, we need to still inform them about how much volunteer stuff goes on and how important it is, and it's not sustainable. So like, I think Matt talked yesterday about volunteer burnout, and I've seen this across loads of non-profits and trade associations. You like a lot of trade associations have started pretty small, the number of users have grown, the number of trails, and you just get to a situation where a lot of people, there is just massive volunteer burnout. And so, like what we've done at Walker, the whole strategy was to move away from that operational board to a governance one, which is taking time. And then we need funds there to, get paid positions and get everything moving. And what I'm seeing I get contacted by a lot of smaller, trade associations in Canada, and they ask how to do it. And I think everyone's trying to do the same thing. It's just, it needs to just kind of share information about that. But the funds need to come from somewhere as well, which is where poor people are struggling to.
Yeah.
And so, I'd say if the number of users are growing, the number of bikes being sold is growing, we need to see some of those funds, and more companies support trade associations. I think needs to keep happening.
Yeah.
It's going to be really important in the next 5 years.
I think that's pretty much, sort of saying there's lots of skills as well. So I think like when you said about making it sexy, you're far better than copywriting for me. Like I'm not right. It's just not my skill. But actually, can brands support in that way as well? So financially, that's great. But actually, how we have content and things like that, and even advice or workshops where you can say, this is a really good way of actually getting people interested in what we do. Like, where if someone's interested in digging, that might not necessarily be their skill set, but actually can we support it with those kind of skill sets? I was just trying to think of a solution, that's all. Yeah.
I mean, I think that's a really good call. It's interesting, like we talked about the word advocacy yesterday, and like it's perfectly appropriate to talk to land managers sometimes using that word, but to your general mountain biker, that sounds like bureaucracy and meetings, and I don't really want to do that. Same thing with back when they were the MBOSC, they changed the name from Workday to Dig Day, which doesn't seem all that significant, but I work 60 hours a week. Do I want to go work more? I do want to dig, so sometimes it's just being thoughtful about the words you use. But to your point, when Matt had on the screen sort of the 101 through 401 thing, it does feel like there's a space for some resources to help clubs like yours or anybody's with kind of some of these baseline things that could be really helpful. So something for us to think.
I feel like we've dropped down a little bit not into the weeds, but into more detail. To help me, I kind of need a bit of a higher level input on the challenges that we face, so that I can then go and who do I talk to? Who would I interview? Which group of people do I need to put together to start this conversation? So I'm kind of keen to pull it up away from some of the more detailed stuff to get a bit more open.
Chris, I think it would be helpful. You said sustainability, and I wasn't thinking of the sustainability of volunteer staff at all when you said that word. So it might help if you kind of gave us a little bit more context to what you did.
I'm interested because I think that word is really important and it covers so many different things. So that's one element, volunteer burnout. So I've written that down. Can we encourage more of my listeners to go and approach trail groups and get involved? That would feel like a good thing that we can maybe do, right? But I guess when I say it, I think more about the environmental aspect across all levels. So single-use plastics, trail erosion, shipping things all around the world, all of this kind of stuff. Where do we move? What would we want to see action on?
I think it's a couple of different things. When COVID started, the senior centers in my area all put up banners that said "Heroes work here," and it's kind of like that. It's like a Heroes Work Here podcast where you go through a couple of these different areas. It's without these different heroes working here, you don't have this industry because you don't have a place to go ride. So it's just identifying these different hero areas. I mean, I like the idea of making sure we have more volunteers coming all the time, but there's probably other hero areas too.
Mm-hmm.
One thing that has been interesting for us is the diversity of people that have volunteered for us. And so it's do the employees at companies know that if I'm a marketer, then I can also help a trail organization with marketing, or if I'm a copywriter, then I can also do copywriting for a trail organization. And it's not just the digging. that I can volunteer my time on.
We ask for that sometimes because we have like a corporate donor, and sometimes we can just say, actually, your time is more valuable than your money. So actually, if you're in marketing, then that's really, really useful.
I was gonna say, it's like, I find these advocacy meetings incredibly useful through the summits that we go for. And I'm privileged to be awarded the grant to be here. But for every one of us, there's hundreds, if not thousands, of organizations that are tinier, that are stewarding much smaller areas. And the questions you ask about the problems and the stuff that we're facing, they're facing too. And how do you scale? I mean, you can't invite them all to Santa Cruz and have all that stuff. So how do you scale the exchange of knowledge, the information, and everything to these kind of groups and people out there? And I think if that's something you can work out on a scale that's susceptible, I think it can advance the sport as a whole for everyone.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, there's a lot, like, everyone's been through very similar struggles. There's tools and techniques that everyone would benefit from. But where's the central point where all that is taught from, available from? And that comes for diversity and inclusivity as well, right? There's education toolkits, but if you don't know where to go, you can't get it. So yeah, I think
we have to be careful. We'll show up on a pink bike chat room in like a heartbeat. So control that.
With the sustainability, Chris, I think the sort of town, like trails near people, and the actual traveling, I think is really, really important. And I think just urban-based trails, and where we look at them, we have, we can ride out stuff, and I know that's not the situation for most people, but things like pump tracks are really good access points, and you also don't need an amazing bike as well. So even things like that, little things like that, just making these stepping stones for people. But as Greg was saying, if my dream in Sheffield is that all those trails you can basically drop right into them. So we start making those links. So almost you do that, you don't need to drive out, or you start in the city centre, or you end your ride by a cafe, and you start to use all those local facilities where it's like trail there, cafe there, and you don't have to drive between them. I have to do all those things. So actually, cutting out the car use is really, really important. And I work for a sustainable travel company, and then tell people I go and pay someone to drive me up a hill numerous times to ride my bike then. But I think sometimes we do. There's still a need for that. But actually locally, in that, like our riders, and I think even people like gravel and things like that, or giving people those gaps in between. Actually, you can enjoy riding off road, but it doesn't need to be that. It doesn't need to be this, but just kind of where you actually fill those in. So thinking about just how you get there. So biking is cycling is always seems to be really, really green and really sustainable, but as we creep into sort of mountain biking and the travel and all those things like that, then it perhaps becomes a bit less environmentally friendly.
Oh yeah, I mean, I've spent my bike advocacy career in two big cities, New York City and Houston, where it's very difficult to get to the wilderness if you live in the heart of the city. And there's a certain level of privilege that I think comes with this sport as we think about it as a sport, because you generally need to use a car to do that. It's the environmental piece of it, but there's also the financial piece of it. I just put a hitch and a bike rack on the back of my car, and it cost over $700. That's on top of what is a decent mountain bike, at least $1,000, twice that if you want a nice Santa Cruz bike. And if you want to participate in this, you don't have all the ability to get out there in a car. How do you do that? When I think about the work that I do in transportation cycling, replacing car trips with bikes, we always talk about the barriers. What are some of the barriers to getting on a bike? Of course, traffic safety is one of them. Not having a safe place to lock your bike is a big barrier too. And when it comes to off-road bicycling, it seems like there's even more than that, because you can't just ride in the street. You can do off-road bicycling. You need to have the facility to do it, which is what so many people in this room do. So it seems like there's, in terms of sustaining the activity and growing the movement, I would assume that given that most, I don't know what the case in UK and Canada is, but most Americans live in cities or in the suburbs around cities where getting to off-road cycling is not that easy. So how do we improve access? It seems like a big part of that, both in the terms of sustainability, like emissions from cars reduction, but also sustainability, like how do people even get to trails? How do you get more people to buy mountain bikes if they live nowhere near an off-road facility?
It's integrating, I think, is in Boise, where they've got the whole sort of rad sidewalks, where they're kind of like connected to like suburbs to the high schools, and it's just like almost like Is it better? The thing I've seen in Boise as well, we've got that, and it's just make that more interesting. Again, get those kids active as well, which is really important. But actually, that you kind of integrate with what people do. But the space. I think you're over here. You've probably got more space to do that as well. But how do you actually make those connections? Can you actually ride that off road?
Ride to the road.
Yeah.
I reframe the question a little bit. Maybe what worries you about the state of mountain biking right now? That if something doesn't happen in the next 5 to 10 years, we're going to have some big issues.
Access is I think you should push out.
Is that something that's what's causing that issue, and is it consistent? Is it getting worse? Is it getting better?
Wasn't it recently, I think in some western state in Colorado, some of the equestrians are pushing back to close mountain bike trails that were previously open or something like that? Yeah.
What's driven that?
The mixed use trails tend to have, any conflicts in that, depending on who your friend is at city council or on the Parks and Rec Commission, that rug can get pulled out from you pretty quickly.
What is that an issue that's new or becoming worse, or?
Well, with the growth of the mountain biking sport, it's a wide front now, trying to push for more trails. So all of the jurisdictions now are having to react to all of these organizations pushing upward now, trying to get more trail or bring the old trail back online or get an equestrian trail or a mixed trail designated as a mountain bike only trail. So it's that friction between local government and our level of organizations trying to keep the sport active
and user
keep
groups.
The access up.
And user groups too. There's
still
still
an emerging issue, respective to user groups. I think we're going to see an increasing amount of different technology on the trails coming soon. I think Class 1 e-bikes could be exempted from this. I think they're equal to mountain bikes as far as their version. I think the motorcycles we're starting to see on the trails are going to, if they're electric, they're silent. It's a lot easier for anyone to go ride anywhere on these particular pieces of hardware. And when the people don't want to pedal,
On type products.
and when the prices come down and they're accessible, those are going to be found. They're already ubiquitous here on our trails, and that's going to cause. We already have our access issues. I fear what I'm scared of in the next 5 years is access that's already shaky. It's on shaky ground already, being wiped clean by lumping us in with this new.
I was going to say, is it that like association that it's a two-wheeled thing off-road that hasn't got an engine, but even though a motor it arguably is, gets lumped in with us, and then we're the people that lose access off the back of that. And it's starting to happen in the UK. We're seeing issues with Surons at like trail centres and all kinds of places.
Yeah, to me that's the biggest one. Like e-bikes, the cause and solution to all our problems is like yes. So the positives, and like Greg can talk about this a lot. Like you can not shuttle and you can go and do rides and never get in the car.
Yeah.
How good that is for the environment. But then we've got to figure out how we're going to get rid of those batteries when they're no longer any good. So there's the downside of that, right?
Yeah.
And then exactly what Garen was saying, like we see this on, and Joe can probably chime into this as well, like on all the bike paths, like getting bike paths made in cities and stuff, like around Portland, there's a lot of off-street bike paths. And now you started seeing a bunch of like, class 1 and class 3 e-bikes, and that's cool. Like those still feel pretty safe and they're pedaling and they kind of feel like they have control of what they're doing. But now I see a ton of throttle, that not even e-bikes, because no pedals, no even real drivetrain, but flying down these same bike paths, and to the regular walker, dog walker person that's on these multi-use paths, now it's like e-bikes suck because that person is flying through there at 40 miles an hour. And they don't look at it like it's not e-bike, whereas we all know that's not e-bike, right?
Yeah.
But it's becoming increasingly more difficult, and then what do? They ban all e-bikes from being on the strips.
Or bikes.
Yeah.
Or like
it's already
I always say that every time a mountain biker gets into an argument with a hiker on a trail, it always blows back to me where they want me to close the trail, ban mountain bikes forever. Just two strangers arguing in the middle of the woods.
Right.
Yeah.
A lot of the
So it comes down to etiquette.
a lot of our access issues, our base access issues for mountain bikes, base management access issues, haven't had good or long-term solutions when the layers of additional users were laid on top, the layer of e-bikes and the layer of the other motorized equipment that's laid on top. And there's a lot of focus that has moved to those arenas, but a lot of the base issues haven't been solved yet, and they still need to be worked on to migrate up through the top and find solutions for all our users to exist. The different types of trail systems, the different types of design components for those trails. A lot of our trails are still legacy trails that weren't really designed to manage user conflict or have sustainability. And as more trail organizations and trail builders come online, we could use the additional education to bring everybody's skill level up to build more resilient, sustainable trails that also manage users better. How do we bring up that idea and forward that idea so it improves?
That's exactly, I think, what my thoughts were. Is like, we're sitting here as the mountain bikers now. We've got some access, and we're looking and we're saying, but we don't want those people on our trails, just as equestrian groups and hiking groups were there before. And some of our problems are that our trails were built, some of them were built with different levels. A lot of the unsustainable trails are gone now. Now it's sustainable trails, but do they manage user conflicts? Do they work for multiple user groups and the volume of people that are finally getting into the outdoors more and more often? So trying to manage that while we also have full electric dirt bikes that, when someone's up there on a gas-powered dirt bike, it's just like, boom, someone's got their camera out, they're taking a picture, they're sent to the police, it's on Facebook. But, what's the line between that and, do we exclude one wheels? We have 20 people on one wheels that showed up and they're all over our trails now. And that's, this different group that kind of, they don't have to pedal. How do we start to push back and do we have to make a list of no one wheels, no? Is it where's it in and where's it push into push against adaptive use?
I was talking to Chris about Chris just talked about this yesterday. I think one of the failures of us, rural leaders in some ways, you described earlier, rural leaders in mountain biking, and it's a failure of all of us for not educating our friends, families, communities, people, whoever we have influence over the etiquette and behavior to be a mountain biker or a trail user, or to even to open up the doors for more access. I see just the growth of we can say mountain biking, but I think it's all recreational access has just grown a lot over the last decade, in particular. And I think one of the things is we just haven't educated our people on what are the right things to do. How do you approach the trail? It'd be nice to say hi.
Some stickers on the bike.
Be nice to say
Stickers on the
hi.
bike with loads and loads of stickers. But I mean, I would say that is the biggest barrier to mountain biking growing is that you ride past someone's battery. That's the bit they remember. So if someone goes out on the trails and they go hiking, they get passed by 100 bad bikers, they will remember that one bad interaction. They won't remember the 99 really good ones. And that's really, really key. And I think, it's turning that around and how we do it. And it's really, again, it comes down to trail associations. Don't do that. And it's just that becomes our role. And I don't want that to be our role. I don't want to be the fun police. I don't want to tell people off. But I want people to, the ethics and the understanding it. And I've used the example of surfing, but someone pointed out the surfers that just end up punch one another, don't end up wearing. So it's maybe, we have that with climbing ethics, that if you were to do things, to chip holes, to do these kind of things, then you will be an outcast. You literally, we've got a really big climbing community, and you will be an outcast if you do things wrong. Yeah, and that type of thing. And I think so we can self-police. Again, it comes back to calling people out.
Calling them out, but I think also I think 30 years ago when I started mountain biking, I was brought up by some mentors, older folk who showed me how to mountain bike and how to behave and how to do it. especially when it was a very, very small sport, really. You knew every mountain biker in town and then the same in every town. But now it's a different sport entirely. It's relatively mainstream, like, and very well adopted. And so everyone's not coming into the sport with that necessary mentorship. So we have to find other ways to communicate.
And we don't have the channels, I think, often because they're not reading Pink Bike or Mountain Biking UK magazine. They come in a different route, and it's hard to talk to them. I think we don't know how to access them.
I think there is that sometimes I feel there's a sense of entitlement on the trails.
Yeah.
If you're fast and ride hard, then this place is for me. And the more that we see these new audiences come in to our sport, and the more we talk about diversity and inclusion, we're going to see different people on the trails, and yet we're going to get to that point at which we're going to normalise it. But for some people, it's about how you respect those other trailblazers that are going to be beginners, that are progressing, and to give them the permission or the space to say, actually, you're welcome here as well. So that sometimes there is a bit of an attitude, and we, through our women's mountain bike group, we share stories of sexism on the trails, because of trying to get your king of the mountain or your best Strava. You don't want to stop for people on the trail, so you might say rude things or get off the trail, or you shouldn't be on this trail because you're not fast enough. We've heard all of these things before, and it's like you said, if you have that one bad experience, right, it puts you off going back. So we need to prepare ourselves in terms of that etiquette and how we respect other people on the trail, and to allow those newbies to come in and experience it positively.
I think Neela nailed it with the entitlement thing. That's a huge one. I speak for our own little bubble, but you can also, maybe it's another primer. I see these every few years, and they tend to, an entitlement or an etiquette piece comes out, and some people read it. There hasn't been a good one for a while. It would be nice if we had one that was a reference piece that we could go back to on the podcast instead of digging through some old magazine. But one of the things that goes with that entitlement is not only your entitlement about your speed, your pace, and your manner on the trail. It's entitlement in being there in the first place. And then within our mountain biking culture, there is a trail building culture, and some trail builders aren't building in sanctioned areas.
And you see that with private road trails too.
Sorry,
That's what he's talking about.
Oh, okay. Just talking to Matt Young about this last night. We don't have. I actually devised an idea on how, but we don't at this point have a channel through which we can speak to our local trail builders. Our trail builders, you have MBOSC, Santa Cruz Mountain Trails. That's Matt's.
Yeah.
Then you have a lot more trail builders.
Yeah.
And that is where the entitlement seems to be raging unchecked right now. They're building trails on top of each other. Their entrances and exits are so blatant that it's causing issues with the local neighborhoods. Like where I live in the mountains, there's 4 or 5 trails now coming down the road, right onto the road, and people on the next door groups and the Facebooks are talking about these, and there's literally groups of people talking about how to reach out to your local representative, who to talk to at Fish and Game and Wildlife, who to talk to at state parks about this particular issue, this trail that came out. And these guys, they have no idea, because they're not looking at those channels, they're not looking at Facebook, they have no idea that they're creating a target on their backs for what they're doing. And that is where the raging, unchecked entitlement is really starting to cause severe
Yeah, 100%.
We talked a lot about education, and when I'm working with road cyclists, for example, there's a general sense of shared responsibility, like you generally follow the rules of the road. And I don't know, I'm new to mountain biking, is there a shared mountain biking set of rules? Because we talk about calling people out, like maybe that's on social media, or talking about educating friends and family and people in our networks. It's like, how far is your reach on that? Like, how many people can you actually touch? Like, I know as an advocate, I can't police individual behavior. Like if somebody sees people doing wheelies and riding without helmets, not that we have a helmet law, people will send me messages on social media like, you guys need to call out these groups, or you need to better educate people. And it's like, we don't have the capacity to enforce.
I don't have that guy's phone.
Yeah, it's hard to kind of call people out when there's nothing written down. It's like, well, I didn't know the rules. So it's an education piece, I think, first.
But
Just to let you know.
Has anyone got anything like they feel strongly about that they're worried about over the next 5 years that we haven't?
I mean, wildfires.
Yeah.
Okay, I probably can't do anything about that.
Well,
can we?
I thought when I think Joe was talking about it last night, how you guys moved the trail off the top of the ridge, like so that it would be it wouldn't get nosed by the fire breaks when the fires did come.
Yeah, I mean that might be of interest to some people, just how recreational trails are going to be used for fuels management, kind of that stance and like what those like desired conditions look like in the forest and where the trail gets located and so it doesn't get bulldozed. You know,
and use that as a possible leg for a new trail building. Like that's you build that into your forestry plan.
Yeah.
But the other half of that is not just sort of prevention. I mean, those are great things, but like Dave, we had chats about like how the Forest Service went from COVID mitigation to fire suppression, and that's all they were working on in his district. And like, so if we're trying to advocate for trails, maybe we should be thinking about the destruction of the earth instead of trails. But like, we're here for a good time, not a long time or whatever. I mean, it's a valid, like, sort of what it does to the resources that go into the trails, I think are,
So
we're fucked.
So maybe the worry is the impact that climate issues are having and are going to continue to have on our trails. And how do we respond? What do we do differently? How can we help the world piece, but also how can we build differently, think differently about our trails to make them more robust? Well, I think you found that, right? You've been able to use trails for good in that
But like what
space.
Greg said about like how he started with the, and all the trees all over the trails, and we just had that sort of in, we had a really big storm, so in Scotland and like the north of England, there's still massive areas of land which are closed to mountain bikes, and so many trails are being lost. But in this, it's partly that we can plan trails better and actually think about, the impacts of that and looking at, the wood and actually, do educate trail builders about like actually these trees are all dead, these are going to fall over quite soon. But also that when we speak to land managers, we're actually speaking their language because they're their concerns and they realise we're an ally. It's not that we're kind of trying to do this against them. So fire and anything from, water damage, increased, flash flooding and all those things like that are going to knacker our trails, but also make life more difficult for them. But we can kind of, working with them, we can probably benefit everybody.
Shall we park this session here because food's really good and riding bikes is even better?
Yeah.
So I'll say that I'm around for the rest of the day and the night, not too late. And I'll probably be up at like 4:35 in the morning because I'm still spun out on
You're
that.
gonna be out late tonight.
I'll still be up. All right, sweet. But if you have things that you think would be good topics for the podcast, interesting, helpful, useful stuff you want to hear about, come and tell me. I'll either scribble it in my phone or in a pad if I've got one. But yeah, I don't want to stop you from eating and riding bikes, so let's go do that.